The wind clawed through Maple Creek as Ethan Walker's truck rattled to a stop before his father's forgotten gas station. For a soldier broken by war, this ruin was no inheritance, but a curse etched in rust. Yet beside him stood Ranger, a blind German shepherd draped in a white scarf, a dog he never asked for, but could not ignore. And while Ethan saw only decay, Ranger's unseeing eyes turned toward the cracked wall, as if he already knew of the hidden safe. A secret worth $100 million, a fortune that could redeem Ethan's life, or destroy it forever. Please support us by subscribing to our channel and tell us in the comments where you are listening to this story from. The winter air in Maple Creek, Colorado, carried the sharp bite of mountain winds, as if the Rockies themselves wanted to remind every soul who lived beneath them that nothing lasted forever. Snow from last week's storm clung to the shoulders of roofs and the edges of the cracked highway. The town was small, little more than a scatter of brick storefronts and rusted metal signs, and silence seemed to press against the windows of closed diners and shuttered hardware stores. A pale sun drifted low on the horizon, casting a brittle light that stretched long shadows across the skeletal trees. Ethan Walker stepped out of the old truck with stiff movements that betrayed both the long miles he had traveled and the years that had weighed on his body. 38 years old, he still had the tall, lean frame of the soldier he once was, though it had thinned into sharp angles and restless energy. His broad shoulders slumped under a worn brown leather jacket, the seams fraying at the elbows. Beneath it, he wore a faded gray t-shirt, the letters of some forgotten unit nearly rubbed away. His jeans were light blue, scuffed at the knees, tucked into boots that had marched too far. His hair was dark brown, cut short from old habit but unkempt, and streaks of silver had begun to creep at his temples. The eyes beneath his furrowed brow were storm gray, eyes that had once scanned desert horizons for threats, and now searched the ground as if to avoid memories. The faint stubble on his jaw only deepened the impression that this man belonged to some place that no longer existed. He had returned to Maple Creek not out of love, but out of duty, summoned by the passing of his father. The inheritance was not land, not a house, not wealth, but this, Vance's service station, a gas station that leaned like a tired sentinel at the edge of town. Its roof sagged under the weight of snow, its once bright sign now dulled to a blur of peeling paint. The cracked windows reflected nothing but empty skies. It was supposed to be his father's last offering to him, but to Ethan, it looked only like another insult, another reminder of a man carved from discipline and silence who had never once told his son that he was proud. Ethan stood in the brittle cold, running a gloved hand over the rough stubble of his jaw. "A ruin," he muttered. His breath drifted like smoke in the frozen air. He had not expected much. His father, Colonel Richard Walker, had left him little in life except the memory of stern lectures and an unyielding back turned against him. A colonel who commanded with precision, but who never once knelt to listen to the heart of his son. The gas station, rotting and empty, was fitting. It was not a gift. It was a burden. He pushed open the creaking door of the office. The smell of dust and old oil rushed out. Shelves stood crooked, half collapsed under the weight of rusted parts and yellowed invoices. The counter, scarred and chipped, still bore the faint outline of a register that had been removed long ago. Light filtered through blinds that rattled in the wind. Ethan felt the familiar ache stir in his chest, the same ache that had driven him to whiskey bottles and dim apartments after the war. He clenched his fists inside his jacket pockets, as though holding himself together by force. Then he heard it, a shuffle, soft and deliberate, like paws on the cracked linoleum. His body tensed, old training snapping awake. He turned quickly. Out from the shadowed corner of the office emerged a German shepherd. The dog moved with slow certainty, large frame steady despite the white cloth tied carefully around its eyes. The scarf was clean but worn, a strip of fabric knotted at the back of its head, veiling the sightless eyes beneath. Its fur was a sable mix of dark black and burnished tan, with silver dusting its muzzle and ears. Though blind, the dog's head was held high, posture noble, each step balanced as if guided by instinct sharper than the sight. Its tail hung low, but did not waver, and its ears tilted toward Ethan with uncanny focus. Ethan froze, breath catching. "Well, who are you?" His voice was rough, but beneath it there was a flicker of something softer, something wary. The dog stopped a few feet away and stood as if in silent judgment. Then it tilted its head slightly, as though listening not to Ethan's words but to his heartbeat. Ethan noticed the leather collar around its neck, and beneath the scarf, the faint scars that spoke of age and battles fought unseen. He knelt slowly, his knees creaking. "Ranger," he whispered, reading the tag that hung from the collar. The name was etched into dull metal. He reached a cautious hand forward. The dog did not flinch. Instead, it stepped forward and pressed its broad head gently into Ethan's palm. For a moment, Ethan's storm-gray eyes softened. This was no stray. This was his father's dog, left behind deliberately. He should have felt only annoyance, another responsibility, another mouth to feed. But instead, he felt something else, something unsettling. The dog seemed less like an animal and more like a sentinel, left to guard not the station, but him. "Figures," Ethan muttered. He scratched absently behind the dog's ear, surprised when it gave a low, approving rumble deep in its chest. "Dad leaves me a ruin. And a blind dog." He shook his head. "What am I supposed to do with you?" But Ranger did not waver. He stayed close, as if tethered by a bond Ethan had not yet agreed to. His nose lifted toward the air, then back to the cracked floor near the far wall, where his paw scraped once, deliberate, against the tile. His blind eyes seemed to search through the dark, seeing what Ethan could not. Ethan frowned. "What are you looking for?" He straightened, rubbing the cold from his hands, but the question lingered. For the first time since stepping back into Maple Creek, for the first time since standing before his father's forgotten station, he felt a tug of something other than bitterness, not hope, not yet, but a question, a direction. And at the heart of it, a blind German shepherd wrapped in white cloth, acting as though he had been waiting all along. The wind rattled the station windows again, carrying the howl of the mountains, and Ethan found himself standing not quite as alone as he had believed. The next morning in Maple Creek broke pale and brittle, as though the sun had to claw its way through the gray veil of clouds just to remind the town it still existed. Frost glazed the windows of the abandoned station, painting delicate white veins across the glass. Inside, Ethan Walker sat on a metal chair that wobbled on the uneven floor. His storm-gray eyes scanned the room with weariness. The service station still felt less like an inheritance and more like a punishment. Dust clinging to every surface, paint peeling from the walls like old scabs. Across from him, stretched on the cold floor, was Ranger. The blind German shepherd slept soundly, his chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of trust, the white cloth over his eyes glowing faintly in the thin morning light. Ethan wondered why the dog stayed so close, as though waiting for a signal only he could hear. A soft voice broke the silence outside. Ethan turned toward the sound of footsteps crunching over the icy ground. Through the cracked glass of the station window, he saw a woman approaching. She walked with quiet determination, carrying herself with the resilience of someone who had faced loss but still moved forward. Clara Reeves was 35, a local schoolteacher who had lived in Maple Creek all her life. She was of average height, slender but sturdy, with the kind of frame shaped not by luxury, but by long days of working and caring for others. Her blonde hair, once bright, was tied back neatly into a ponytail, though a few strands escaped to brush her pale cheeks. Her eyes were a warm hazel brown, steady and kind, yet shadowed by something deeper. She wore a long wool cardigan the color of cream, buttoned over a simple blouse, and jeans tucked into weather-worn brown boots. Life had tested her. Her husband had died in a logging accident 2 years earlier, leaving her to raise their only son alone. Since then, Clara had grown quiet, protective, and fiercely determined to shield her boy from further harm. Trailing just behind her was Sam Reeves, 10 years old and fragile in a way that was not physical, but emotional. He was small for his age, with a thin frame and narrow shoulders. His hair was chestnut brown, cut short, and often fell into his light green eyes that avoided contact with the world. Sam rarely spoke. The shock of losing his father had carved silence into him like a permanent wound. He wore a navy blue winter coat zipped high, the hood pulled loosely over his head, and clutched the strap of a small black backpack as if it anchored him to something solid. Clara greeted Ethan with a polite nod when she reached the entrance. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice calm but guarded. "I heard you were back in town." Ethan rose slowly, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the dusty floor. "That's me, though I don't know if it's good news for Maple Creek." His words carried a hint of dry humor, but there was no smile behind them. Clara studied him carefully. She had heard stories of Ethan, the soldier who had gone away, the man who had not come back whole. Now, standing before her, he seemed carved from the same stone as the town itself, cracked, weathered, but enduring. Before Ethan could say more, Sam stepped forward slightly, his eyes fixed not on the man, but on the dog lying on the floor. Ranger stirred at the sound of small boots scuffing the wood and lifted his head, ears pricked forward. Though his eyes were blind, covered by the white cloth, his nose flared, and he released a low, curious whine. Sam's lips parted, but no words came. He hesitated, then crouched slowly until he was nearly at eye level with the dog. His green eyes softened in a way Clara had not seen in months. Ranger tilted his head, then pushed himself up and padded toward the boy, sniffing gently at his hands. Sam extended his palm tentatively, and the dog pressed his muzzle against it. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sam smiled. Clara blinked in quiet astonishment. Since her husband's death, Sam had closed himself off, retreating into silence. Now, this blind dog had reached him in seconds. Ethan watched silently. Something shifted in him, though he would not name it. Perhaps it was the way the boy's small fingers disappeared into the thick sable fur, or the way the dog's ears relaxed as though recognizing an old friend. For a man who had spent years avoiding connection, it unsettled him how quickly Ranger forged one. "His name's Ranger," Ethan said quietly. "He belonged to my father." Sam looked up, his lips moving as if to shape a word, but instead he simply nodded. Clara felt her throat tighten. She placed a hand gently on her son's shoulder. "Thank you," she murmured to Ethan, though she wasn't sure if she meant for allowing the moment or for bringing the dog here at all. Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Don't thank me. He's not mine. He just came with the place." Later, as the day settled into its pale winter rhythm, Ethan busied himself inside the station. Clara had offered to help him sort through some of the mess, insisting that Maple Creek looked after its own, even those who claimed they didn't want the help. Sam stayed close to Ranger, sitting cross-legged on the floor while the dog lay beside him, head resting on the boy's lap. Ethan tried to ignore the strange calm that settled over the room because of it. It was then that Ranger moved. Without warning, the German shepherd stirred, lifted his head, and padded toward the far wall of the office. His nose pressed against a patch of plaster near the floor, and then his paw scraped once, twice, against the discolored bricks. Ethan frowned. "What's he doing?" Clara asked, brushing dust from her hands. "He's been like that since yesterday," Ethan said, watching closely. "Sniffing at the walls, like he knows something I don't." Ranger dug harder, his claws clicking against the weakened surface. Bits of plaster flaked away, revealing the faint edge of something metallic beneath. Ethan crouched down, curiosity sharpening the lines of his face. He pressed his own hand against the wall and felt the cold surface. With a grunt, he grabbed a crowbar from the corner and wedged it into the crack. A chunk of wall gave way, clattering to the floor. Behind the loosened bricks sat a heavy, rusted safe. Its surface was scarred with age, the iron dulled to a deep gray. A single keyhole and a faded dial lock gleamed faintly under the dust. Ethan leaned back on his heels, breath clouding in the cold air. "Well, I'll be damned." Clara stepped closer, her eyes wide. "A safe?" Ethan nodded, wiping grime from his hands onto his jeans. "Looks like the old man left more than just broken shelves and unpaid bills." He tugged at the dial, but it didn't budge. The keyhole glared back at him like an unsolvable riddle. "Can you open it?" Clara asked. Ethan shook his head. "Not without the key, and not without the combination." He stood, frustration creeping into his voice. "Typical. He leaves me a ruin, and now he leaves me a locked box with no way in." Ranger sat beside the safe, tail curled neatly around his paws, as if guarding it. His blank eyes behind the white cloth seemed fixed on Ethan, patient, unyielding. Ethan stared back, unsettled by the silent message. For the first time since arriving in Maple Creek, Ethan felt something stir inside him. Not just bitterness, but the weight of a puzzle, a question left deliberately. And at the center of it all, a blind dog who acted as though he already knew the answer. The safe had become a silent weight in the corner of the service station, an iron guardian of secrets Ethan could not yet touch. Days passed, and every morning the pale light of Maple Creek filtered weakly through the cracked blinds, illuminating the heavy box as if mocking him. Ethan tried everything he knew, prying, forcing the dial, even striking it with an old hammer from the garage. Nothing worked. Each attempt ended in failure, and with every failure his temper frayed a little more. Ranger never moved far from it. The blind German shepherd would sit with his powerful frame anchored near the safe, ears turning toward every sound, his white cloth covering his clouded eyes like a soldier's bandage. Sometimes he would place one large paw against the safe, then turn his head as though waiting for Ethan to finally understand. Ethan cursed under his breath more than once. "What are you trying to tell me, old boy?" But Ranger only breathed steadily, calm, patient, as if time meant nothing to him. Clara Reeves often stopped by with Sam after school. She said it was to check on Ethan, but Ethan suspected she worried about the boy more. Clara, with her blonde hair always tied neatly and her cardigan buttoned against the cold, carried an aura of quiet strength. She would bring muffins wrapped in wax paper or thermoses of coffee, saying Maple Creek neighbors looked after each other. Ethan was still awkward with kindness, but he found himself less quick to protest when Sam settled into the corner with Ranger. Sam, 10 years old, had not yet found his voice again, but his silence no longer felt empty. With Ranger's massive head in his lap, the boy seemed at peace, his green eyes softening, his shoulders loosening. Clara noticed and often lingered by the counter, watching her son stroke the blind dog's fur with an expression of cautious hope. One evening, as snowflakes drifted like ash outside and the mountain wind clawed at the window panes, Ethan sat at the worn kitchen table upstairs in the small apartment above the station. A single lamp cast a tired circle of light over unpaid bills, old photographs, and the stubborn memory of his father's disapproval. The safe downstairs still mocked him. Ranger lay near the door, his breathing heavy, his white scarf faintly stained with dust from the day. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his head pounding from frustration. "It's useless," he muttered. "Whatever's in that box, it's locked away for good." He rubbed his hands over his face, then looked at Ranger. "You keep guarding it like you know, but I don't." The dog stirred, shifting slightly. Ethan noticed the scarf had slipped crookedly around his head. He frowned. For some reason, his chest tightened with the thought that perhaps he should wash it. The cloth had been wrapped around the dog since the day they met. And though it looked clean enough, the years of wear clung to it. With a sigh, Ethan stood and crossed the room. "Come here, boy. Let's take that thing off for a while." He knelt beside Ranger and gently untied the knot at the back of the dog's head. Ranger stayed perfectly still, trusting, as the cloth fell loose into Ethan's hands. Beneath it, the dog's eyes were clouded white, blind and milky, but Ethan hardly noticed because something heavier than fabric clinked against the floor. Frowning, Ethan lifted the scarf. Sewn carefully into the inner seam was a thin leather band, almost invisible unless one knew where to look. Attached to the band was a small tarnished metal loop holding two things: a tiny brass key and a worn oval tag etched with a series of numbers. Ethan's breath caught. His storm gray eyes widened as he turned the tag over in his palm. The numbers were 6 digits, neat but faded with age, just the right length for a safe's combination. His hand shook as he lifted the key, its teeth rough but intact. Ranger gave a low, approving rumble in his chest and nudged Ethan's knee with his nose. Ethan stared down at the dog, disbelief warring with the beginnings of something far more dangerous: hope. "You've been carrying this all along," Ethan whispered. He felt a strange laugh rising in his throat, edged with wonder and bitterness. "The old man, he hid it with you, trusted you more than his own son." But as he said it, Ethan realized the weight of those words. Maybe his father had not trusted him before. Maybe the colonel had known his son would return broken, bitter, needing a guide. And so, he left Ranger, the blind guardian, to hold the key until Ethan was ready. With pounding heart, Ethan stood and moved quickly down the stairs into the cold garage. The safe waited in the corner, half hidden in shadow. Clara and Sam had gone home hours earlier, leaving him alone with the silence. He crouched in front of the safe, the metal key trembling in his grip. Ranger padded after him, settling beside the box like a silent witness. Ethan slipped the key into the rusted lock. With a heavy click, it turned. He exhaled sharply, then set his fingers on the faded dial. One by one, he twisted it through the sequence on the tag. Left, right, left. His palms sweated, the air thick with tension. The final digit fell into place. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep groan, the mechanism yielded, and the safe's heavy door swung open. Inside lay a stack of documents bound in leather folders, preserved from time and dust. On the top rested a single envelope marked in neat handwriting. To my son, Ethan Walker. Ethan's throat tightened as he pulled it free. His father's handwriting was as precise as a drill order, yet beneath the rigid strokes lay something almost human. He tore it open with trembling hands. Inside was a legal trust document bearing official seals and signatures. The words blurred for a moment before his eyes sharpened to focus. A transfer of assets, totaling $100 million, placed in Ethan's name. The paper slipped slightly in his grasp as the weight of the number crashed into him. 100 million. The inheritance was not a ruin, not a joke, not an insult. It was a fortune, hidden, protected, and left for him. Ethan sank back against the wall, breathless, the documents clutched to his chest. His mind reeled, not with greed, but with confusion, disbelief, and the beginnings of an entirely new burden. Ranger leaned forward, resting his head on Ethan's knee, his body warm and solid against the cold floor. The blind dog had done his duty, leading his new master to the truth. Ethan's storm-gray eyes filled with a fire he had not felt in years. For the first time since returning to Maple Creek, for the first time since the war, he no longer felt like a man abandoned to ruins. He felt like a man standing on the edge of something vast, terrifying, and filled with possibility. The safe stood open. The secrets of his father finally revealed. And in that quiet winter night, with snow whispering against the garage windows, Ethan knew that life would never be the same. The safe lay open in the corner of the garage, its secrets revealed. Ethan Walker had barely begun to grasp the weight of the trust papers, $100 million signed over to his name, when unease took root in his chest. Secrets that large never stayed hidden for long, and Maple Creek, though small and silent under the Rockies, had ears sharper than the wind that clawed through its streets. By the third day after opening the safe, strangers began to appear in town. Ethan noticed them first at the diner across from the post office. Two men in dark coats, their hands never far from their pockets, watching with eyes that cataloged everything. Maple Creek had only one main street, and everyone knew everyone else. Outsiders stuck out like oil on snow. One of them was Frank Delaney, a man in his late 40s with the build of a boxer gone to seed. He was broad-shouldered, his neck thick like a bull, but his belly hinted at too many meals on the road. His hair was black and slicked back with too much pomade, and his mustache framed a mouth that rarely smiled. His eyes, however, were sharp and restless, darting like a crow scanning for scraps. Frank had once been muscle for a smuggling outfit down south, and though Ethan didn't know the details, he could read the man's type in an instant. Violence wrapped in a cheap coat. The other was Cole Maddox, younger, leaner, maybe mid-30s. He carried himself with the wiry tension of a man who lived off nerves and paranoia. His blonde hair was cropped close, and his face was pale, almost sickly, but his blue eyes glittered with a mean intelligence. Cole spoke little, preferring to watch, and when he did speak, his voice was soft, almost polite, which only made the edge beneath it more dangerous. Ethan spotted them again outside the hardware store, then later, idling in a truck at the edge of town. He didn't need proof to know what they wanted. Word had traveled. Someone had spoken of the safe, of the station, of him. Whether it was coincidence or betrayal, It no longer mattered. That evening, the mountains darkened under the weight of an approaching storm. Clouds rolled low and heavy, turning the sky into a bruise. Snow began to fall in thick, wet flakes, clinging to the telephone wires and piling against the door of the service station. The wind rose, howling through the cracks in the eaves, and Ethan knew the storm would be bad. Clara arrived just before dusk, her cardigan wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her blonde hair damp with melting snow. Sam trailed close behind, his hood pulled up, eyes wary. Clara's face tightened when Ethan told her about the strangers. She had grown up in Maple Creek, and danger was not unfamiliar. She had lost her husband to a logging accident when a safety harness snapped. Since then, she had learned that threats often came quietly, unannounced. "We need to be careful," she said firmly, her hazel eyes catching the flickering light from the sea's lamp. "If they're after you, or whatever you found, they won't stop with polite questions." Ethan nodded grimly. "I know, and I don't think we'll have much time." As if to prove his words true, headlights cut briefly through the storm outside, glowing against the snow before vanishing near the tree line. Ranger stirred at once, his ears pricking beneath the white cloth that bound his blind eyes. He gave a low growl, deep and steady, and moved to stand between the door and the small group inside. Then came the sound, boots crunching in snow, deliberate and slow. Ethan's military instincts snapped awake. "They're here!" The first blow against the door rattled the entire station. Sam flinched, pressing against his mother. Clara wrapped an arm around his shoulders, her jaw tight. Ranger's growl deepened, chest vibrating with warning. The second blow cracked the wood. Ethan grabbed the heavy wrench he had left on the counter, his storm-gray eyes narrowing. He had no rifle here, no squad at his back, only a blind dog, a woman, and a boy who had forgotten how to speak. But he had fought with less. Snow blasted in as the door burst open. Frank Delaney stepped through, broad frame filling the doorway, his mustache bristling in the cold. Behind him, Cole Maddox slipped inside like a shadow, his pale face lit by the storm's fury. "Well," Frank said, his voice rough like gravel, "looks like the rumors were true. The soldier came back and Daddy left him something worth killing for." Ethan raised the wrench slightly. "You picked the wrong night," he said flatly. Cole smiled thinly. "On the contrary, the storm makes it perfect. No one will hear." They moved forward, but before they could take another step, Ranger lunged. Blind though he was, the German Shepherd was a force of muscle and instinct, guided by scent and sound. He collided with Frank's legs, knocking the bigger man sideways into the wall. Frank cursed, struggling against the 100 pounds of snarling dog pinning him down. "Run!" Ethan barked to Clara. Clara didn't hesitate. She pulled Sam by the hand and darted toward the back door. The storm outside was a wall of white, snow driving sideways, the wind screaming like a living thing. Ethan grabbed Sam's backpack from the hook by the door and shoved it into the boy's arms. "Stay with your mother." They plunged into the blizzard, Ranger snapping free from Frank's grasp to follow. Cole shouted behind them, and gunmetal flashed in his hand, but the storm swallowed the shot before it reached them. The night turned into chaos, snow blinding, the ground slick with ice. Ethan led them toward the tree line, his boots sinking deep, but it was Ranger who truly guided them. The blind dog moved with certainty, nose to the wind, weaving through the drifts with uncanny precision. He barked once, sharp and urgent, then veered left. Ethan trusted him without question, pulling Clara and Sam after him. They stumbled over fallen branches, the storm clawing at their clothes. Clara's face was pale with cold, her breath coming in gasps, but she never let go of Sam's hand. Sam's hood had blown back, snow clinging to his brown hair, his green eyes wide with terror. For so long he had been silent, burying his grief deep inside. But as the shouts of Frank and Cole carried faintly through the storm, closing in, something broke loose inside him. "Mom!" he screamed, his voice raw and high, cutting through the blizzard. "Mom!" The word hung in the frozen air, louder than the storm itself. Clara's eyes filled with tears even as she clutched him closer. It was the first word he had spoken since his father's death, the first crack in the shell of silence that had bound him. Ranger circled back once, pressing his shoulder against Ethan's leg as if to reassure him, then led the way again, his blind eyes fixed forward. Behind them, the hunters cursed and stumbled, but the storm belonged to Ranger now. And in that furious night, it was the dog who carried them all toward survival. Morning came to Maple Creek with a fragile calm, as if the storm that had torn through the mountains was nothing but a nightmare. Snow still blanketed the valley, heavy on rooftops and tree branches, but the winds had stilled, leaving the world hushed and pale. Smoke curled from chimneys again, and the people of the small town emerged cautiously, brushing snow from their steps, their faces drawn with questions. They had heard shouts in the night, gunfire muffled by the storm, and they knew that something had happened at Vance's old service station. Ethan Walker stood outside the battered door of the station, his leather jacket dusted with frost, his storm-gray eyes scanning the horizon with soldier's vigilance. Clara Reeves was beside him, her blonde hair tucked into a knit cap, her hazel eyes tired but steady. Sam clung to her side, still pale but alive, his green eyes wider now, no longer veiled in silence. And at Ethan's feet sat Ranger, the blind German shepherd, his white scarf tied firmly once more, ears pricked as though nothing escaped him. By mid-morning, law enforcement arrived. Sheriff Martin Hayes, a man in his early 50s with a sturdy frame and graying hair cropped close, stepped out of his patrol truck. His lined face carried the look of a man who had spent decades carrying both the law and the weight of neighbors' secrets. He wore a thick brown coat over his uniform, his boots crunching in the snow as he approached. "Ethan Walker," he said, his voice even, but carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Heard we had some trouble out here last night. Folks said they saw strange trucks near the station." Ethan nodded. "We were attacked. 2 men, Frank Delaney and Cole Maddox. They wanted what was in the safe." The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "And what was in it?" Ethan hesitated, then handed over the sealed envelope that had carried his father's trust papers. Sheriff Hayes unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the legal language, his brows lifted. $100 million left in your name." He gave a long whistle and glanced at Ethan. "Well, that explains why trouble came knocking." Before Ethan could answer, another vehicle pulled up, a black SUV bearing the insignia of the state attorney's office. From it stepped a woman with sharp posture and calm authority. Assistant District Attorney Margaret Collins, a tall, elegant woman in her mid-40s, wore a dark wool coat, belted at the waist, and leather gloves. Her auburn hair was swept into a low bun, and her gray eyes shone with intelligence and measured caution. She introduced herself quickly, her tone brisk but not unkind. "We've been monitoring unusual financial transfers linked to your father's estate," she explained. "It seems Colonel Walker anticipated trouble and placed safeguards in these documents. The assets are legitimate, the trust valid, and the money, now yours, has already been cleared. By the courts, but it will also draw more danger. We'll provide temporary protection until matters settle." Clara, standing nearby, let out a quiet breath. Ethan only nodded, his expression unreadable. He had expected the weight of the fortune to feel like a prize, but instead it felt like another mission, another burden to carry with discipline. Over the next week, Maple Creek buzzed with news. Some neighbors looked at Ethan with awe, others with suspicion. A few whispered about greed, but many rallied around him when they learned what he intended. Ethan had no interest in hoarding wealth or leaving town. Instead, with Clara and Sam's encouragement, he began drafting plans to breathe life into the service station again. One evening, gathered around the old kitchen table upstairs, Ethan spread the blueprints he had sketched. Clara leaned over, her cardigan sleeves pushed up, her eyes bright with curiosity. Sam sat beside Ranger, tracing the lines with his small fingers, his voice still hesitant but whispering words now and then. Ethan explained in his steady voice, "I want to rebuild this place, not as a gas station, as something better, a coffee shop maybe, where the town can gather, and alongside it, a shelter, a rescue center for animals, dogs, cats, whatever needs a home, a place where they can heal, where kids like Sam can come and learn trust again. We'll call it Ranger's Haven." Clara looked at him for a long moment, her hazel eyes warm, with a hope she hadn't allowed herself in years. "That's more than rebuilding a building, Ethan. That's rebuilding lives. And so, the work began. The townsfolk, once skeptical, slowly joined in. Sheriff Hayes himself stopped by on his off hours, hauling timber with his strong shoulders. Margaret Collins ensured permits and paperwork were expedited, impressed by Ethan's refusal to indulge in selfishness. Even Sam found his place in the effort, painting small signs with bright colors, his laughter returning in short bursts that brought tears to Clara's eyes. Throughout it all, Ranger remained the station's true sentinel. He would lie on the porch as the workers hammered nails and set beams, his blind eyes hidden behind the white scarf, but his nose twitching at every scent. Children from the town came to pet him, their giggles echoing as he leaned his heavy frame against them for comfort. For them, he became a symbol of strength without sight, of loyalty without condition. Months later, spring thawed the valley. The snow melted from rooftops, and wildflowers pressed through the damp earth. On a bright April afternoon, the new sign was hung above polished glass windows and freshly painted doors. The letters carved into rich wood read, "Ranger's Haven, Coffee and Rescue." The building, once a ruin, now stood proud, its windows gleaming with light, its shelves stocked with simple goods, and a warm aroma of coffee drifting through the open door. Ethan stood out front in a clean shirt for once, his storm-gray eyes softened by the sight of neighbors gathering. Clara stood beside him, her blonde hair shining in the sun, her hand brushing his lightly without hesitation. Sam laughed nearby as he showed a painted sign of his own, "Welcome, friends," to the crowd. And in the center of it all lay Ranger, the blind German shepherd with the white scarf, his head held high, as though he knew this was his legacy too. Children clustered around him, stroking his thick fur, while adults nodded with respect. Ethan looked down at him and whispered, almost to himself, "You were never just my father's dog. You were my guide, my guardian, and now theirs too." The mountains towered beyond, eternal and watchful, but in the heart of Maple Creek, a new chapter had begun. Ethan had found meaning. Clara had found trust again. Sam had found his voice. And Ranger had become more than a dog. He had become a symbol of hope, loyalty, and the power to lead even in darkness. In the end, Ethan's journey with Clara, Sam, and Ranger reminds us of a simple but powerful truth. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not come with thunder or lightning, but with quiet loyalty, with the courage to keep going when the road is dark, and with the faithful companions God places in our path. Ranger could not see with his eyes, but through his trust and devotion, he led an entire family back to hope. It is the same in our lives. We all face storms, broken places, and heavy burdens. Yet God has a way of sending us small signs, people, or even animals that guide us back to the light. These are not coincidences, but the gentle touch of His hand, reminding us that we are never alone. So, if this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us what this story meant to you. Do not forget to subscribe so you can join us for more stories of faith, healing, and second chances. And if you believe with all your heart that God still works through miracles both great and small, then write one word in the comments, Amen. May the Lord bless you and your loved ones, and may He send you the light you need in your own season of struggle.